Hello, comrades, and welcome back to the Ushanka show. Today I would like to cover a topic of racism in Soviet Union. I think it's pretty interesting to talk about it because on the surface we had no racism, of course, in Soviet Union because Soviet government promoted the friendship of all the nations, all the peoples in the world in their fight against the global imperialism. So we had hundreds, thousands of banners and posters, picturing different color faces, all united together, like, workers of the world united. It doesn't matter if you're yellow or black or white, we're all together in our battle against the world capitalism. Well, the reality was quite different, although, this is a situation when, if you don't have black people, you don't really have racism in the country because there's really no one around you to be kind of like your worst characters will show up. I'm trying to think about any example, but if you we didn't have black people in the Soviet Union, so there was no really racism situation. It's kind of similar what you can think of in Soviet Union. I was always proud to announce we have no unemployment, but that was the reason why if you don't work, it's illegal not to work. So government will claim, of course, we have zero unemployment because even the ones that don't work, they'll fudge some papers that it looks like they work. We didn't have a racism because we didn't have a lot of people of different color. But at the same time, we actually had a racism, and it was quite extreme. And I want to mention right away the language situation. So you probably know that in Spanish, black is negro. And that word kind of went into Russian language. So official word for the black person was negr. So, if you're a black-skinned person, you're a negro. And that was a normal, good word. It wasn't derogative. Now, if you call a black person as black, черный, или чернокожий, black-skinned person, then this is kind of like a racist term almost. So if you want to show disrespect, you'll call him he's black or he's black-skinned. If you say in a respectful way, you say he's negro, on negro. He's, black person in a good way. So even I live in the capital of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, which is population around 3 million at that time, or maybe 2.5, I barely met any black people in my life. And so that was quite a shock for me when I came to United States in 1995 because I got a job in a camp for inner city kids from Chicago. So that was a 100% black camp, kids, counselors, except the camp director and some staff, everyone else was black. And I guess I was scared racist because I was really horrified because after watching all the movies about, what's going on in the hood, and I was really scared just because I thought they hate white people and they'll just, at least I'll get beat up. I'm not sure about getting killed, but I was really scared for, a couple first weeks till I figure out what's going on. So now, during the Soviet Union, the only black people that we had there were students from Africa. So there was quite a educational program going on, and a lot of students came to Moscow, Kiev, maybe Minsk, to the big cities. They had some international departments in universities. Like in Moscow, there was a university, actually it was named after Patrick Lumumba, I believe. So they had a lot of students from Africa. Kiev had a university that had quite a few. I cannot tell you how many. Sorry, I was too lazy to do research, but they be partially paid by the governments. And, they were the country that are friendly to the Soviet Union. So I guess Soviet Union was sponsoring. So they'll study engineering or whatever. But the first thing they had to learn will be to learn Russian. So they come, and first year will be just basically learning Russian language because we didn't have courses in English. or French or whatever the language the country was speaking or people were speaking there. So they will learn Russian, and then they'll study the subjects, get education, they go back to their homeland. And I'm not sure how the things were going in the colleges themselves, in those universities, because they stayed in the dorms. I think they had a separate, like a more upgraded dorms for foreign students. But the problems, like with the regular population, started when those African guys started dating local girls. And that's when the ugly face of Soviet racism showed up. Because people were extremely angry. Like, if you see the girl walking with the black guy on the street, I mean, there'll be literally people stopping, like old ladies will be yelling at the girls, like, what's wrong with you? You can't find a boyfriend, local boyfriend like Ukrainian or Russian. Why you have to date this cigarette butts? It's one of the derogative terms would use, like my dad was saying it all the time, because, the end of the cigarette butt is black, so they call them akurak, cigarette butt. So girls will be having getting hard time, and then of course black students, they could get in trouble if there'll be some, bunch of young drunk guys seeing a black guy with a white girl. They might just stop them and start harassing, maybe even beat up the guy. Now, I don't know why would local girls want to date African guys. They definitely had way more money, because at that time, we talked many times, those Soviet people were generally poor. The salaries were really low, but since medical education was free, medical service was free, education was free, housing was pretty inexpensive, rent if you get good housing. So otherwise people didn't have a lot of money. So when those guys came, even from Africa, which is, those countries are not rich, but they had foreign hard currency, and they could bring goods that people paid a lot of money. So all you need to bring with you, Levi's jeans, chewing gum, some other foreign goods, and you can make a killing reselling that stuff in Moscow or Kiev, because people will pay, 200, 300 rubles for a pair of Levi's. So you can turn your $50 into 300 rubles, and that's a lot of money. So those guys were rich in Soviet standards, and I guess some girls just like guys who have money, can spend money on them, can give them nice presents that no one can get them here in Soviet Union. Or maybe they just like something exotic, like, maybe some girls always fantasize, I like to date black guy. I don't know, but so there were some ladies that were dating, even they were harassed. Some of them even married the African students and left the country, went to Africa. And I don't know any stories about how good the situation was there. But as I said, everyone, both black boyfriend and a white girlfriend, they both had really hard time in Moscow or Kiev. They were harassed and stuff like that. So we had quite a few racism in that way. And, myself, I'm guilty of that too, because there was some friend of mine told me a story, and we all thought it was so funny. And it was they said this girl was riding on a trolley bus late night. So there was one of the last trolley buses. It's about midnight. And they said it was almost empty. There was a drunk guy sitting in the back of the trolley bus, just kind of half asleep. And there was this black African student that was kind of lost. So when a trolley bus stops and doors open, and on a stop, it will say bus stop, he will kind of step down, and if somebody on the bus stop, he will ask him, hey, is this such and such stop? Because he's looking for a specific stop that he need to get off to go back to whatever. And tell him no, and then, of course, doors close. He rides to the next stop, does the same thing, doors open, he steps down, he kind of sticks out his head out of the trolley bus, asking people, is that the specific stop? So at one stop, he does the same. He did the same thing. He kind of leaned out of the trolley bus, so the door opened, and he's asking, what stop is this? And suddenly this drunk guy gets up, kicks this dude in his behind really hard, so the guy flies out of the trolley bus, face down on the blacktop, and this drunk guy yells at him, "This is your stop. This is Africa." And door closed, and trolley bus left. And she said, whoever was on the trolley bus, including the driver, they just had a really good laugh. And I thought it was so funny. And I'm looking back like, oh my God, it was so mean. But yeah, that's what the drunk guy got. He got tired of hearing this accented Russian. What stop is it? What stop is it? And he just got up, kicked him in the ass, said, Africa. Doors closed, they left, and they thought it was very funny. And even uglier face of Soviet racism was happening in schools. Because, when you date a black guy and things maybe didn't work out, like marriage-wise, whatever, you can still get pregnant, right? So there were quite a few girls that got pregnant with the African students, and then maybe they didn't want to do anything with that. They just left for home. So there were girls like single mom with mulatto kids. We call them, if a mix that's mulatto, we say mulat. So you could tell that they're not white, right? They might have a dark curly hair, kind of not black skin, but darker skin. And those kids had horrible time in schools. Like I remember reading articles in the newspapers, they would be just picked on all the time by other kids. I think some kids maybe even committed suicide, but they were just harassed by children. So not even on adult level, even on a children level, it was really bad. And then, usually mulatto kids, they get, how to say correctly, so they get sexually developed earlier than regular white kids. So, girls already in the 4th, 5th grade will start showing, boobs, and her butt get bigger. So they'll get sexually harassed on the top of being harassed regularly, sometimes get raped. So, yeah, we actually had quite a bad situation with racism in Soviet Union, although it was never in public. But I said those places where we had African students, we actually had quite a few ugly things happening between local people, Soviet people, and black people. Well, I hope you like this story, and I hope you learned something new about life in Soviet Union. Thank you so much for watching my channel. Please don't forget to put likes under this video, ask questions, put your comments, and we'll talk to you soon. Hello, comrades, and welcome back to the Soviet vlog. The topic of today's video is nationalism in Ukraine, and we will talk about relations between Russians and Ukrainians mostly during the Soviet Union, during the period that I remember. Someone asked that question in my previous video when I touched the topic of racism, which there's, I think, quite a difference between racism and nationalism. So, for example, I see the way racism is relations, mostly negative kind of type of relations between different races. So you're talking about whites and blacks, or, Asians, we'll call them sometimes yellow in Soviet Union, yellow people. When the nationalism is pretty much the same race, but then you have a different nationalities and how they interact between themselves. So I would say maybe like in case of Africa, there'll be different nations on the continent. In case of Soviet Union, the closest 3 nations, Slavic nations, there'll be Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Russians. So I will share my memories, what I remember about relations between mostly Russians and Ukrainians back in the Soviet days. Well, first of all, you need to understand that I myself, as a perfect product of the Soviet system, looking back and thinking about it, I'm like a Toyota Prius. I'm hybrid, because I am, I mentioned many times, I thought about myself, first of all, as a Soviet person, so I'm a Soviet person of Ukrainian nationality. And what that meant, actually, that I'm a Russian-speaking Ukrainian. My first language was always Russian. So this is kind of really, I would say, weird situation. As I said, I'm like a hybrid car, hybrid person. I'm Ukrainian national that speaks Russian. And like my parents, both Ukrainians, although they came from different areas in Ukraine, so they spoke different Ukrainian dialect, you say. My dad is more like from western area, central west, so Zhytomyr region. So they had a kind of the different dialect or accent. And my mom came from northern Ukraine, which was heavily impacted mostly by Belarusian language and some Russian. So she used a lot of words that not really Ukrainian words. But when my parents moved in Kiev, they both switched to Russian language. So I grew up as a Russian speaking person. And of course, that fact that I attended Russian speaking schools also had a huge impact. So this is what was going on in my case. So let's talk about, first of all, what was going on in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, during the Soviet times. If I recall correctly, most signage in Kiev was in Russian. So the stores, gastronomes, univermags, all the grocery stores, most of them were in Russian. Some of them were in Ukrainian, so I'm not sure if those are some kind of standard or what, but we had stores that called мясо, which means meat, and sometimes it would be miyaso with the little like apostrophe, which meant it's in Ukrainian, same word. But if I remember correctly, most signs were in Russian. Same with announcement on public transportation. For example, in subway or on tramways. There's only places that we actually had like announcement about what is the name of the next stop. On the bus, like you're supposed to know what is the next stop. There was no announcement, but on subway train and tramway, there'll be a pre-recorded announcement. This is the stop, Gnata Yuri, for example. The next stop is whatever the name of the next stop, and it'll be announced in Russian. So that's just kind of interesting. So you have a capital of Ukraine, which most signage is in Russian and most public transportation announcements in Russian. Similar situation was with schools, colleges, and kindergartens. I attended, several schools. So I went in one in Chokolovka, number 69, and studied there for 3 years. Then we moved, so I changed school, and all 3 schools I attended were Russian speaking. So all the subjects were taught in Russian, all the books were in Russian, except the classes of Ukrainian languages and Ukrainian literature. Those were, of course, in Ukrainian. And honestly, I didn't look up, but it was hard to find Ukrainian language school. So the school that everything is taught in Ukrainian in Kiev. So you have a capital of Ukraine that hardly had any schools that teach in the native Ukrainian language. So that was really bizarre. And in fact, when the situation changed after Ukraine became an independent country, is that I have a hard time helping my little brother, because after switch to Ukrainian language, I didn't know the terms like math terms, physics terms, chemistry terms. I was totally confused because I didn't know in Ukrainian how to say all the terms in math. So that was quite a weird experience when I couldn't help my brother because I couldn't understand what he was talking about. Now, if we zoom out and we'll say take a look like a big picture of Ukraine generally and its Ukrainian history, I don't want to get in a lot of details, but Ukraine had a really complicated history. It's one of those unlucky countries that always had really powerful and aggressive neighbors. So we had Poland to the west and Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then we had Russia to the east. So Ukraine was constantly being almost like grinded between those powerful states. So Western Ukraine was mostly under control of Poland or Austro-Hungarian empires for centuries, and then Eastern Ukraine was under Russian influence. So it's definitely like almost 2 different countries that now is one country. So it's a huge difference between Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine. Then if you look down south, we have Crimea, which is a totally separate story. We always had horrible history with Tatars who used to live in Crimean Peninsula. They were always raiding Ukraine and taking slaves and stuff like that. So for centuries, we had really bad relations with Crimea. And then Crimea became part of Ukraine in 1954 when Khrushchev did this symbolical transfer in order to celebrate 300 years of Russia taking over Ukraine, pretty much. And as a to celebrate that event, he I don't know say that word, by administration he turned Crimea into under Ukrainian control, but technically it was still part of USSR, so that was not a big deal at all. Like there was no manifestations in Moscow protesting against transferring Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine. And of course, another ugly page of history of Crimea is that after World War II, all Tatars were like almost overnight put on a train and sent to Siberia or Asia, and then they moved a lot of Russian people to take over the Crimean Peninsula. Like there was some kind of incentives offered if you move down to Crimea. So pretty much overnight, Stalin changed the population from mostly Tatar people to mostly Russian people. And I think it's one of the reasons Crimea was always like artificial part of that didn't belong really to Ukraine, because population was mostly Russian that came in after World War II. When I grew up in Kiev, many of my friends were Russians. I can't even tell you, maybe 50%, if not more. And it was really not a big deal. Would never make a difference for me who I play with outside. It was Russian kids or Ukrainian kids. We all spoke Russian. But quite a few of my best friends were actually Russians. They were from the military families. So those, like officers, they were moved around the country quite often. And so I had people that my friends, that their parents got assigned to be in Kiev for their military duties, and they get apartment and they attend the local schools. And the only way I actually knew they're Russians is because they wore different uniforms. Like in Russia, it was a dark blue color uniform for pupils, for kids going to school, and in Ukraine it was a brown one. So they wore blue uniforms because they brought it from Russian schools, and they didn't study Ukrainian language. Like there was a system that if your parents are military Russian personnel, they weren't required to study local language. So if you're in Ukraine, you're not required to study Ukrainian. If you're in Kazakhstan or Baltics, you're not required to study local languages. So all you need to do is just sign a paper. And so I was kind of envy because I had to sit in class and study Ukrainian language while my friends were just hanging out outside waiting for next class because they didn't have to study Ukrainian language or literature. So now if we talk about general policy, government policy, the whole idea was that one country, one people. So there was kind of like a Sovietization, which was pretty much like Russification. I'm a product of that I'm a Russian-speaking Ukrainian person that always consider myself Soviet first. So I think all those things that happened in Kiev were a direct result of the Moscow policies, although it depended a lot on the local leader. And there's a quite interesting event happened. I remember reading about it. So when Brezhnev was the general secretary of Soviet Union, at the same time, our local general secretary of Ukrainian Communist Party, which this is a bizarre thing that local party leaders were actual leaders of the republics or country. So when Brezhnev arrived to Kiev with a visit, and I believe he arrived by train. So he was met on the train station, train station in Kiev by, girls dressed in national Ukrainian costumes. They presented Brezhnev with this traditional Ukrainian bread and salt and the girls were talking in Ukrainian, greeting Brezhnev in Ukrainian, singing Ukrainian songs. And so then later Brezhnev asked Sherbitsky, like he was really surprised, and he's like, why do you all guys speak in Ukrainian? And Sherbitsky looked at him and said, Comrade Brezhnev, do you expect us to speak Chinese? You arrived to Ukraine, we speak Ukrainian here. So that was famous. He was quite a guy, Comrade Sherbitsky. And it was one thing he did is he actually pushed back on Brezhnev on this silly question, why do you guys speak Ukrainian here? So the only time I could hear Ukrainian language would be actually on radio. So the local Ukrainian stations were transmitting or having programs in Ukrainian. Then we had two Ukrainian TV channels, which were in Ukrainian, most of it, and some local newspapers that were Ukrainian language newspapers. Otherwise, as I said, it was really bizarre if you were on the street or in the bus on public transportation and you hear someone speaking Ukrainian. It was kind of weird. Like I hardly ever met a person on the street speaking Ukrainian in the capital of Ukraine. On the radio station, yes. On TV, yes. But in real life, if someone, asking you some question in Ukrainian, he's probably came from Western Ukraine because, no one speaks Ukrainian here in the capital of Ukraine. How weird is that? Now, if we talk about nationalism and maybe kind of like some problems between Russians and Ukrainians, the only kind of silly things I remember is when I became older, I was not a young boy anymore and I started kind of looking at girls. My mom started talking to me, those mother talks, parent talks about look for the right person, look for the right girl. So one thing she was mentioning, and that's kind of, I would put it in the category of nationalism, like she was saying Serежа, which is like a kid form of Sergei name. You should look for Ukrainian girl. The Ukrainian girls, they work harder, they cook better, they have the same mentality as you do. Russian girls they tend to be lazy. They may be pretty, but they don't like to cook and they're lazy. So if you're thinking about dating someone for marriage, you probably should consider Ukrainian girls. So that was kind of a silly thing for me to hear, but I remember mom kind of talking to me that way. My first experience of Russian nationalism was in quite unusual circumstances. And it's just because it was quite a shock to me, I remember it quite vividly. So one of my friends was getting married. So he came back from army. So I would say it was probably 1990, maybe. So 88, yeah, about 1990. So right before the Soviet Union went belly up, he was actually Russian, marrying Ukrainian girl. So we all knew he's Russian, but he was a good friend of mine. He's from Murom area in Russia. I'm not sure how come that his parents moved to Kiev, but so we were getting ready for marriage. Well, he was getting ready, so we were attending his wedding. And of course, there were quite a few his relatives arrived from Murom, from Russia. And there was this young guy, his cousin, I remember. He was quite young, and he came, besides attending his relative wedding, he also came on a mission to have sex with Ukrainian girl. So I found it really bizarre. For example, if I would go to Moscow, or if I'll go to United States, all of us America may be different. Like, okay, I want to experience sex with American girl. But in this case, if we're talking about same country like Soviet Union, if I go to Moscow, maybe be interested. Okay, I'll be interested, to have sex with Moscow girl. And it's not it doesn't matter what nationality, just local girl, because maybe they have this whatever different. This guy, and that's why I kind of got a little bit upset, I would say, because he wasn't about I want to have sex with local girl, from a girl from Kiev. No, he was specifically saying, to me, which I'm Ukrainian, I want to have sex with Hakhlushka, which I'll talk about it a second later. We had this a little bit derogative names for nationalities. So Ukrainians had a nickname Chachol, and of course, if you're a female, you Hakhlushka. Now Russian will be Katsap or Katsapka. So he was specifically saying, I would like to bang Hakhlushka. And he was just constantly repeating that, that's my mission. And he was like so boldly into it, like he's telling Ukrainian friends of his relative, like, hey, do you know anyone who will be like easy lay? Because I promise my buddies I will bang the chachlushka. And that was really like not cool. It's the first time I was like, who cares like what nationality the girl is? But for him it was very important that she must be Ukrainian girl. So that was like a dominance thing or whatever. But that's the first time when I just kind of like, this is a really weird attitude like from Russian person, but Russian person from Russia, that it's very important that I need to have sex with Ukrainian girl. And he tried really hard during the wedding. He was hitting really hard on this one girl. I'm not sure if he succeeded or not, but that was my first like impression. Now I notice, since there's online forums and there's a lot of tension going on between Russia and Ukraine, so it's like a big deal for Russians to say something like, yeah, your Ukrainian girls come to Russia now to work as a prostitutes, so we're banging your girls, so that's like dominance thing. So I see that's like that was a precursor for that is back in 90s that the Russian guy came to Ukraine with the mission, I need to bang the Ukrainian girl. And of course, and as always as a neighboring countries, we had jokes about each other. So there was a lot of anecdotes, jokes about Ukrainians, hachols, and like we are really sneaky, dumb, and we like pork fat, salo. So that was like these key jokes about Ukrainians. Now katsapy, or the other word we use moskal, which is more like historical word. Moskal is more even means like soldier. So when during its Tsar regime, Tsar Russia, when they drafted you in the army, they will say like, yeah, they shaved you into Moskal, so you'll be a soldier Moskal for the next 25 years. So the jokes about Russians will be that they drunk, they dumb, they really generous, like they will give anything away, but mostly like they stupid and they constant drunk and they will do anything for vodka. And then of course our third brother from Belarus, nickname was Bulbash, and mostly jokes were that they're all about potatoes, because it's all they like planted and grew in Belarus, potatoes. So all the jokes will be all the humor about them and being addicted to potatoes. So this is kind of, I remember what the humor was, but it was kind of friendly. I won't say it was anything mean. I mean, we'll have a jokes. Okay, so there's this maybe American, Ukrainian, and Russian go and they get in some situation, and how the Ukrainian deals with that, how Russians deal with that based on their national attributes, and then how the American, of course, will be doing it all stupid, complicated way, and he always got beaten by Ukrainian and Russian. Another small interesting detail, when I went with my class to Riga, which is Latvia, one of the Baltic states, and it happened, I believe, in 1987. So that was like exchange program. We went to Riga and we stayed in local school in the summer, and stayed for like a week. In the same that one class from Riga went to Ukraine and stayed in our school. There was rumors that if you talk Russian in Riga, they won't help you. So for example, if you go to the store and you ask to buy something and you speak Russian, they're just gonna ignore you. I just remember that because when I went there, I was trying to buy things. I was asking for in Ukrainian to purchase things, but then we tried in Russian and it worked. We had no one gave us any attitude. So after that, we just were speaking Russian and dealing in Russian, and we had no issues. But I was surprised to meet quite a few older people who spoke Russian like really strong accent. That was really bizarre, because Baltic states were part of Soviet Union for 50 years, and these people still speaking Russian with such a strong foreign accent. So that was weird. And of course now, since Ukraine is independent since 1991, a lot of things change. Like I come to Ukraine and it almost feels like I come into the foreign country because everything is in Ukrainian. And I remember days when some nationalists, Ukrainian nationalists, at the beginning of the 90s were attempting to raise the yellow and blue and yellow, to say more correctly, flag in the front of the building, government building in Kiev, and the cops chased them away and ripped that flag down. Now, Waka, there's a blue and yellow flag up there. A lot of people speak Ukrainian. All the signage is in Ukrainian. Public transportation, everything in Ukrainian. So it really I'm a foreigner now from my own home country, but a lot of things changed since 1991. Well, I hope you enjoyed another long and boring video from Comrade Sergey. I hope I maybe help you to understand better the situation with relations between Slavic nations of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And as you probably noticed, I don't know if you see it, but YouTube is really mean when it comes to videos touching these topics like racism and nationalism. So they cut my monetization right away. So if you feel these videos are useful and they need to be out there, I really appreciate your support. You can just forward a couple of dollars via PayPal and support my efforts to tell you more about life in Soviet Union. Well, if you're new to my channel, my name is Sergey Nikolaevich Sputnikov, and back in 1971, I was born in the Soviet Ukraine. And today, as I promised, it's my second video answering the question how invasion of Ukraine has changed your opinion on Russia and Putin. In my first video, I answered the part about Vladimir Putin, and you're welcome to check that video. I'll post the link below in the description. My guess that when the question is about how your opinion changed on Russia, it was probably more about how your opinion changed on the Russian people. But let's talk about Russia first. Fun fact, technically there is no country named Russia, Россия. Just like there is no country named America, we have United States of America and we have Russian Federation, Российская Федерация. Even during glorious Soviet days, Russian Republic was called Russian Soviet Federal Socialist Republic. Meanwhile, Ukraine was Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Oh, Russia, Russia, Russia. As I mentioned many times before, Russia is huge. But look at the location. So Russian Federation consists of 21 republics. And Comrade Putin added another one, Crimea. So now they claim they have 22 republics. One autonomous area. This is a Jewish autonomous region. They call it okrug, so it's almost like a round circle, as well as 4 autonomous districts. And just a friendly reminder, Russian Federation is still the largest country in the world, even after collapse of the Soviet Union. If you look at the map of the Russian Federation, you will see the remnants of glorious Russian Empire and its history of hundreds of years of slowly, steady occupation of neighboring countries. And Russia didn't have a lot of success moving westward. So, they had Poland for a while, they had Finland for a while, but then they lost it, while they were moving steadily eastward for many, many years, and it still remains as a part of Russia. And of course, in the Soviet school, during the history lessons, we didn't use the word occupation, оккупация, we used the word development, развитие, other territory. I don't think I'll be extremely wrong if I state that Russian Federation is the last remaining old-fashioned empire that looks like this quilt made of totally mismatched pieces that have nothing to do with it besides occupation done by Russia in the last several hundred years. Do you know that Russian Federation consists of 190 nationalities and actual Russians? They only 80% of the population, and I think that number is kind of high because they consider so-called Cossacks as the part of the Russians, but Cossacks originally came from Ukraine, so they technically should be Ukrainians. But to make numbers look better, Cossacks and Pomors from the northern area, Arkhangelsk area, they all considered to be Russian nationality. When I was putting together information for this video, I realized one curious fact. In English language, there is no word that describes the citizen of the Russian Federation. We just say Russian. Meanwhile, in Russian language,
we say Russian, Русский, as nationality, and Россиянин as the person who are citizen of the Russian Federation, Российской Федерации. So Русский, Russian, and Россиянин, the citizen of Russia. For example, in this horrible war between Russia and Ukraine that's going on right now, most soldiers of the Russian army that invaded Ukraine are not really Russians. A lot of soldiers came from Buryatia, so they are Buryati, and as you see on these pictures, they definitely don't look like your typical Russian. Also, a lot of Russian soldiers came from Dagestan, and 96% of population of Dagestan are Muslim, so they definitely don't look Russian, and they're not following Russian Orthodox religion. As you may know, I follow this horrible war pretty close, and I noticed that hardly anyone from Moscow or St. Petersburg, they fight and die in Ukraine. Most of these poor soldiers that were sent by Putin to fight Ukrainian Nazis came from these poor regions like Dagestan and Buryatia. So these regions don't have a lot of opportunities for young people. So many young Buryats and Dagestanis, after done with their military service, they decide to extend and become a professional soldiers, so-called sverkhsrochniki, that's how I call them in Russian language. So that's like extra termers, and that's the people that got sent into Ukraine. So if someone asking me, did my opinion changed on Russians after invasion of Ukraine? Well, the majority of soldiers that came from Russia to kill and destroy in Ukraine, they're not really Russians. Still, I can't blame that many Ukrainians really hate every Russian and they want them all to die. It just in this situation, it's really hard to remain calm and neutral and understand that what Putin wants, it's not what every Russian wants. And of course, it's easy for me to say, sitting here in Michigan, you probably could be quite different. And I lived in Kyiv or even somewhere else close to the front line. And I absolutely don't believe Russian propaganda when they claim that 80% of Russian citizens support Putin and his war. Because in that society, if somebody approaches you on the street and asking you, do you support Putin or do you want to go to jail, people will just say nothing or they say, yes, I support Putin. So I wouldn't trust even a bit those polls. And of course, there's no reason to deny that a large percentage of Russian population fell the victim of state propaganda. I mean, for like over 20 years, Russian TV, Russian radio, Russian newspapers, all the mass media was promoting Putin as a great leader and was demonizing Ukraine and Ukrainians like these evil Nazi people and also evil, stupid people. So if your brain is being treated for so long with this crap, there's no doubt that quite a few people totally fell for it. And here's the example, and I know some people might get mad at me, but picture if Donald Trump got reelected and then managed to change constitution and remained in power for 20 years, and meanwhile he managed to shut down all the TV station except Fox News, and for 20 some years Fox News will be singing anthems to the great leader of the United States who made America great again. For 20 years, there is no doubt that a lot of Americans will be believing what's coming out with the only TV channel. Now, this is what precisely happened in Russia. For the last 20 some years, Russian propaganda was working hard to convince the Russian population that Russia and Putin is the one. There is no Russia without Putin. He's the only leader who can guide the great Russia into the beautiful future. So once again, there's no surprise that a lot of people fell for it. I mean, Goebbels back in the 30s and 40s claimed that if you repeat the lie a lot of times, it eventually will become the truth for the people who listen to that. So I can't really blame the Russians for swallowing this up, because back in the Soviet days, I was exactly the same way, watching Soviet television, reading Soviet newspapers, and believing that we're the best country in the world and we have the greatest leader in the world, Leonid Brezhnev. So I was been there, done that, just didn't get a t-shirt. And this is why I still go on the pro-Russian YouTube channels and Telegram channels, and I try to engage the Russians, but it's extremely challenging. It's almost like this movie, The Legend. A lot of Russians acting like those zombie people. They're just trying to bite you. They get in angry, nasty. As long as they find out that you're Ukrainian, they've just using bad language. They don't want to talk to you, but are still being polite, still kind of working it. Because there is a hope, a little bit, but still hope. But it's truly horrifying when you read these excited replies to the Putin's comment that world without Russia as it is has no value to him, and he will be more than happy to use nuclear weapons to take care of the West if they continue supporting Ukraine. And a lot of people like, yes, let's just, there's so many missiles should go to sink the Britain. There's so missiles should go, to hit New York City. It's like, oh my God, those people are nuts. And here's another fine example of how stupid some of the Russian propaganda. So for a while I was wondering, they were on TV talking about those stupid Ukrainians announced that they dug the Black Sea by hand, and all that soil from digging the Black Sea, that's what created Caucasian mountains. And I was like, what they got the scrap from? And as it turned out, there used to be Ukrainian TV program, kind of similar to SNL, Saturday Night Live. So they were making these silly sketches, just saying, stuff that's funny. And one of those sketches was about, it's called The Most Amazing Ukrainians. And they were coming up with these stories like Ukrainians discovered America 500 years before the Columbus and already had trading agreements. And Ukrainians flew to the moon before the Apollo. And one of these sketch stories, SNL style, were about Ukrainians dug the Black Sea. But these people took it, turned it around, and made it in the Russian propaganda talking points about stupid Ukrainians claiming that they proved that they dug the Black Sea in ancient times. So I hope I answered your question about how my opinion changed on Russia and Russians after invasion of Ukraine. And I know a lot of people from Russia because I have a Russian language YouTube channel, and I got a lot of messages of support. People telling me that not every Russian hates Ukrainians, and we support you against Putin and we against the war. Well, my friends, it's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video, maybe learned something new. As always, I enjoy reading your comments, so please put the comments below this video, share with your friends, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания, goodbye.
Потому что если дороги будут, то по ним неприятель проедет и прямо в сердце России попадет.
Я с ними согласен абсолютно.